Hi, I'm Maren Ellis. I spent my last $900 on a house no one wanted, peeling walls, sagging roof, mouldy silence. And for that, my family disowned me like I was a glitch in their perfect life. But the worst part wasn't being cast out. It was realizing I'd been invisible all along. The subtle cuts, the strategic silences, the years of being a footnote in my own family, that's what really brought me here. And now they're texting, calling, asking for a room in the home they once mocked. Before we dive in, where are you listening from your lunch break? A late night scroll? Tell me below, because what I'm about to share is everything they hoped would stay buried. The tires made a soft, reluctant crunch as I turned off the main road and into the long, sloping driveway. Gravel scattered beneath me like nervous thoughts, and the house at the end looked exactly like it had in the listing photos. Maybe worse. Boarded up windows, peeling paint, a sagging roofline that seemed to whisper defeat. It didn't look haunted, just forgotten, as if the world had agreed to look away and it had quietly collapsed in on itself. But it was mine. $900. Every last cent I had in savings. No inspection, no guarantees, no welcome mat, just ownership. I shifted into the park but didn't get out right away. Instead, I watched the rain slide down the windshield in weary rivulets. The kind of rain that didn't bother to thunder or roar, it simply persisted like a low-grade ache. I should have felt triumphant, brave, maybe even foolishly giddy. Instead, I felt exiled. I opened the trunk and pulled out the cheap folding chair I always kept back there, originally for writing breaks in the park or impromptu stargazing nights that never quite happened. Today, it felt heavier. Or maybe I was just carrying more than I wanted to admit. I set it down in the gravel, unfolded it, and sat. The cold soaked through my coat. The mud tried to tug at my boots like the earth itself was asking me to reconsider. But I wasn't moving. Not this time. It hadn't started here, of course. It started at the dinner table. Last week, my parents' home. The roast was dry, the wine too sweet, and the expectations were suffocating. Mom was going on about Sienna's upcoming wellness retreat in Sedona, waxing poetic about energy realignment like she was quoting scripture. 15,000, she said casually, as if she were naming a sale price on drapery. It'll reset her energy. After everything she's done for this family, she needs it. Sienna smiled like a saint sipping her sparkling water. Her nails were perfect, and her hair hadn't moved in hours. Then Dad looked at me. Maren, you said you'd transfer the funds last week. What's the delay? I looked up from my plate, my voice calm. I didn't transfer the money. Silence. Sienna froze mid-sip. Mum blinked once slow and strategic. What do you mean you didn't? I bought something, I said. More silence. A house. It was a clean break. No stutter, no hesitation. Just the truth. And it hit the table harder than any clink of cutlery. Dad's jaw tightened. You spent your savings on yourself? Sienna let out a tiny delighted gasp. You bought a dump instead of helping me reset. That is so on brand for you. I stayed steady. I never agreed to pay for the retreat. I just didn't say no. Mum set her wine glass down with a precise click. Then, let me be clear, you've chosen poverty. Don't expect us to fund your delusions. I opened my mouth, but Dad raised a hand. You want independence. You can have all of it. The next morning, my name was gone from the family group chat, like a glitch that never quite loaded. Easter, plans cancelled. For me, at least. That was the message. Subtle, clean, final. Back in the driveway, I stared at my phone still damp from my pocket. One notification. From Mum. Do not come to Easter. No love. Mum. No punctuation. No question. Just a command and a condition. I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the delete button. Then I slipped the phone back into my coat, let it stay, like a scar you choose not to cover. The house in front of me didn't shimmer with promise. It loomed with reality, broken, cold, and undeniably mine. The folding chair creaked as I leaned back, feeling the weight of every unspoken word that brought me here. They hadn't screamed. They hadn't slammed doors. They just erased me softly. But this mud-slick driveway, this quiet standstill, this chair, under rain and doubt, this was the opposite of being erased. This was the beginning of being seen. The front door groaned when I pushed it open, like the house itself hadn't had visitors in years. The cold air met me like a challenge slipping through cracks I hadn't noticed in the photos. The scent of mildew hung thick, layered with the faint sharpness of old metal and wet wood. I stepped over a torn welcome mat that read, "Bless this mess," and for a moment it felt like mockery. Inside, everything was grey, not from paint, but from age and neglect. The floors creaked, the walls peeled, and the silence was dense like it had learned to protect itself. I dropped my bag near what used to be the living room and sat on the cracked linoleum knees pulled to my chest. A single faded curtain hung at an awkward angle, half covering the window like an afterthought. I recognised the fabric. Blue florals from my old college apartment. I'd thrown it in the trunk without thinking. I climbed onto the dented stool to rehang it, and the rod immediately slipped and clattered to the floor, striking my elbow. I cursed, softly rubbing the sting. The noise echoed too loud for a space this empty, and just like that, the memories came rushing in. My 16th birthday. Mom had called everyone into the living room. She held a cake, pink frosting and mismatched candles. Sienna had helped decorate. They were trying. At least I told myself that. Until I saw the writing, "Happy Birthday, Rowana." No double N, not even the right spelling, just something close enough, like I was close enough. I'd spent my whole life correcting teachers, coaches, clerks. It's Marin with an E. I'd say it with a smile so I didn't seem ungrateful. But they, my own family, never learned it. Or maybe they just never cared enough to remember. I remember that birthday vividly. Sienna got a used Volkswagen for hers, complete with a red bow, and Dad beaming like she'd cured cancer. Me, a cake with the wrong name and a mumbled, "Maybe next year," when I asked about driving school. I leaned back against the wall, eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling. Something above creaked faintly, like the house was sighing with me. I used to think those moments were just oversights, that they loved differently, not less. But the older I got, the harder it became to pretend. Christmas photos where I stood half out of frame. Family cards signed "Love you girls" with only Sienna's name underlined in glitter pen. Florida trips where there mysteriously wasn't room in the car. I was 28. At some point it stops feeling like forgetfulness. It starts to feel like a decision. I ran my fingers along the wall, the texture rough beneath my skin. There was no comfort here, no warmth yet, just the knowledge that for once I had chosen this space, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. They told me I was too intense too much. Mum always said, "Let things go." When I asked why, nobody clapped at my award ceremonies. But when Sienna got voted best hair in high school, they framed it like she'd won a Pulitzer. I had won an actual statewide essay competition that year. Dad told me not to gloat, so I didn't. I just kept trying. Straight A's, scholarships, helping Mum with her non-profit's website, being useful, being easy, but easy was never enough. The radiator hissed to life, making me jump. My whole body was strung so tight it felt like a single wrong note could snap me. I walked to the kitchen, or what used to be one. No appliances, no cabinets, just a donated toolbox and a half-open can of paint someone had probably abandoned mid-renovation. I whispered into the empty air. Maybe they didn't forget me. Maybe they chose not to see me. The echo didn't argue, and for once neither did I. I lingered in the kitchen a while longer, fingers tracing the rim of a chipped mug I'd brought from my last apartment. I remembered wrapping it in an old scarf, not because it was fragile, but because it was mine. I poured myself a glass of tap water. It came out rusty, but cleared up after a few seconds. I drank it anyway. There was something about tasting that bitter metal edge that made everything more real. In the hallway, I noticed a crooked frame still clinging to a nail. I stepped closer. It was empty. No photo. Just cracked glass and the shadow of where something once lived. It reminded me of the frame Mum had on her mantel. The one with all four of us, except it was cropped just so. My head half-turned, my body angled away. Like I had been mid-movement or half there. I had asked her once gently if we could take a new one. "It's a good picture of your sister," she said, and that was that. The house moaned softly as I walked upstairs. Each step groaned like it remembered too much. In what used to be a bedroom, I opened the closet door and found nothing but an old wire hanger swinging slightly. I watched it sway, back and forth, like the pendulum of a choice finally made. No more pretending, no more hoping they'd look again and finally see me. Because the truth was harsher. They had seen me. They just chose someone else. Because the truth was harsher. They had seen me. They just chose someone else. I didn't cry that night. The tears had dried up years ago, spent on doorways that never opened, and rooms where my voice never echoed back. Instead, I sat on the floor of that empty bedroom, wrapped in a borrowed quilt, and the kind of quiet that felt almost sacred. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe, but listens. The wind scratched softly at the windows, trying to get in, or perhaps trying to carry something out. Some final hope I hadn't meant to pack. The power flickered, then held. The radiator hissed again, not warmth exactly, but a sound that meant I wasn't entirely alone. It gave the illusion of life, and that was enough for now. My phone buzzed. I didn't look right away. I had learned to fear that sound, not for what it brought, but for what it took. The last message had been a clean execution. No love, no Easter. Eventually I picked it up. One missed call from Aunt Corinne. I stared at her name for a long time before hitting redial. Her voice came through crackly, sleepy, but steady. "Hey, baby," she said. I didn't speak, just listened. She waited, then sighed. "I saw the group chat, the Easter thing." Still, I said nothing. There was nothing to explain. She continued. "They didn't even try to call you, just erased, like a file you don't think you need anymore." That hit harder than I expected. The metaphor was too perfect. "I wanted to tell you something," she said softly. "And I hope you believe me, even if it takes time." I waited. "You were never the problem. You just weren't Sienna. That was your only crime." I swallowed, hard. They built their love around usefulness. And baby, you stopped being useful when you started being honest. Her voice broke slightly. "I've seen this coming for years. The way your mama looks through you. The way your daddy shrinks when you ask hard questions. And Sienna, she learned early how to make her pain marketable. That word, marketable, it stuck, like a label I'd never asked for. "I know it hurts," she said, "but I want you to do something." "What?" I whispered. "Remember this, every second, every ache, every silence they filled with shame. Remember it, because they will come back. They always do." The radiator hissed again, louder this time. The house seemed to lean into the call. "And when they come," she said, voice steel now, "don't you dare forget what this felt like." We were quiet for a long moment. "I love you," she added. "I know," I said. She didn't say goodbye, neither did I. The line just went quiet, two women keeping each other company in the dark. I set the phone down and wrapped the quilt tighter around my shoulders. I let the silence wrap itself around me like a second skin, the kind that doesn't comfort but confirms. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was something harder, sharper, a silence built by decision. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The gravel glistened in moonlight like the road itself was sweating. I opened the window a crack and let the cold air kiss my skin. Let it remind me I was still here. Somewhere across the distance, a lone owl called into the dark. The house creaked softly in response. I leaned on the windowsill and looked out, not searching, just witnessing. The clouds had parted. The sky, washed clean by rain, wore its stars like armor. A noise inside a drop of water from a broken pipe, the groan of wood adjusting to cold, should have startled me. But it didn't. The house was speaking in its own language. And for the first time, I was willing to listen. I glanced at my reflection in the glass. Pale, tired, but whole. There was no one there to crop me out. That was the lullaby I fell asleep to. Not love, not comfort, but the kind of quiet you earn, the kind they called peace, but only when it kept you compliant. I was done being compliant. It was a week later when the knock came. Not the soft, uncertain kind that carried an apology. This was confident, clipped, familiar. I froze on the stairs, a crowbar in one hand and a box of salvaged bathroom tiles in the other. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one knew the address. Except those who chose not to see me. Another knock. 3 sharp raps, the kind Sienna would make with acrylic nails against a champagne flute. I opened the door a sliver. There she was, Sienna. Designer coat oversized sunglasses, and a rolling suitcase that looked more expensive than my mortgage, if I had one. "Hey," she said brightly as if we were meeting for brunch. I didn't open the door further. She smiled like this was a game. "Can I come in?" The spa wing flooded. Pipes burst. Mold everywhere. They shut the whole retreat down for 2 weeks. I didn't say anything, just let her words settle in the air like perfume too strong to ignore. "I just need a place to crash," she added, pushing her glasses up onto her head. Her eyes looked tired, not puffy or tearful. Just used up. "You found me," I said, voice low. She looked away. "Mom told me. Said you'd probably be stubborn enough to stay." Stubborn. That old insult disguised as a compliment. I stepped aside. "Just for a few days," she said, breezing past me, wheeling her suitcase over the threshold like she belonged here. I watched her move through the space, her eyes scanning the cracks in the ceiling, the unfinished floorboards, the absence of things she was used to calling home. "Wow," she breathed. "You weren't kidding." I closed the door. She had no idea what it cost me to open it. She set her things in the centre of the living room and turned to me. "I brought my ring light. Might do a live while I'm here. My followers love a starting over story. This place is perfect for it." A chill ran down my spine, not from the cold. "This isn't content," I said. Sienna blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't mean it's just people like authenticity now, raw spaces, trauma, but make it aesthetic." She said it with a laugh, like she was describing a colour palette. I turned and walked to the kitchen. I needed distance. From her. From the past crawling back in with perfect nails and no apology. Behind me, the ring light clicked on. A halo of artificial warmth against the peeling paint. I heard her voice change, that performative softness she used in videos. "Hey, loves, just a quick check-in. Life threw me a curveball, but we're adapting. I'm here in a rustic little space focusing on healing, grounding the basics." I stood by the sink, hands gripping the edge. I remembered another time, senior year awards night. I had just won the creative writing prize and my name was mispronounced as usual. Mum clapped twice. Sienna arrived late in a glittery dress, distracting the entire room. Someone took photos. Not of me. She didn't ask permission. She didn't ask anything. The same way they never had. And yet, she was here. This house had no insulation, no proper plumbing, but somehow it had become the one place they turned to when their worlds cracked open. The irony made me laugh. Quiet. Bitter. Sienna came into the kitchen, her phone still recording. "Wave!" she mouthed, pointing the camera at me. I looked up. No. She hesitated. The lens turned back to her. "She's a little camera shy," she told the screen. No, I thought. I just finally understand what it means to own space. And not all of it is for sharing. Not anymore. But reflexes don't die quietly. The next morning, I found myself making coffee for 2. Muscle memory, not intent. I set down the chipped blue mug mine and a newer one with a gold rim I'd picked up at a thrift store. Still unused. Still pristine. I didn't remember buying it for guests, but maybe I had always known. Sienna emerged, wrapped in a robe I didn't own. She must have unpacked it from her suitcase. Her hair was up in a bun that probably took 20 minutes to make look effortless. "Smells amazing," she said, sliding into a chair as if the place had softened overnight. As if pain could be wallpapered over by caffeine and casual mornings. I handed her the gold-rimmed mug. She took a sip. "Do you have oat milk?" I blinked, then shook my head. "There's half and half. Somewhere, if it hasn't curdled." She laughed lightly. "No worries, it's fine, just different." Everything was different, but I didn't say that. We sat in silence for a while. Her phone buzzed twice. She checked it, didn't respond. "So," she said finally, eyes not leaving her screen, "do you have a plan for this place?" I stared at the peeling paint. The exposed beams are like bones. Fix what's necessary. Live in the rest. She tilted her head. "That's very poetic." I shrugged. "It's not a metaphor. It's just reality." Sienna smiled. The kind of smile that used to make me feel like I was the one missing something. "You always were the deep one," she said. "Remember when you wrote that essay about feeling invisible and Mum grounded you for making her sound like a villain?" I didn't answer, but I remembered. 17. I'd submitted it to the school paper. The teacher said it was the best thing she'd read all year. Mum said I embarrassed the family. Dad didn't look at me for 2 days. "You're still mad about that, huh?" she asked. I finally looked at her. "I'm not mad. I just finally believe in myself." That caught her off guard. Sienna sipped her coffee slower now. Later, I caught myself folding her laundry. She had dumped it in a basket, clean but wrinkled. I smoothed out each blouse and each delicate undergarment and began making neat piles on the couch. Halfway through, I froze. My hands were moving like they had my whole life toward service, toward approval, toward usefulness. The same instincts that kept me quiet at dinner tables, helpful at fundraisers, and polite in the face of erasure. I dropped the blouse and stood up. My heart beat louder than the silence. In the mirror across the room, I saw myself. Laundry in one hand, anger in the other. I walked outside. The air was crisp, not yet spring, but no longer winter. I sat on the porch steps and stared out at the cracked driveway. What would happen if I stopped being useful? What would be left of me? Behind me, the door creaked open. Sienna sat beside me, careful not to let her robe touch the wood. "You okay?" "Just thinking." She nodded like she understood. But understanding wasn't her strong suit. Performance was. "You always tried so hard," she said softly. "To be good." I almost laughed. "I tried to be seen. That's not the same thing." "You were. Seen, I mean, we just didn't know what to do with you. I looked at her. Why not? She looked away. Because you didn't play the game. You didn't sell the right version of yourself. You made people uncomfortable. You mean I told the truth? She nodded slowly, and for the first time I saw it a flicker of regret. Not enough to change her, but enough to recognize me. That evening I didn't cook dinner. I didn't ask if she was hungry. I didn't refill her mug or straighten the blanket she left on the couch. And I didn't feel guilty. That was new. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and realized I'd gone a whole day without trying to be good. Just whole. And that maybe was enough. And that maybe was enough. Except the universe, as always, had one more test. I was brushing dust off the windowsill when the email arrived. Subject line, urgent, public image opportunity. From Sienna, of course, as if she'd ever used the word urgent for anything that wasn't about her own reflection. Big event tomorrow, the message read. Reset X, Sienna, collab, healing, mindfulness. You should come. Optics would be good. No apology, no explanation. Just the word optics. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind scratch at the windows again. But this time, it didn't feel like morning. It felt like stirring. The next morning, I ironed my only clean shirt. Pressed, plain, unassuming. I packed one thing in my tote bag, a sealed manila envelope printed neatly with the words cease and desist. The venue was everything I expected. High ceilings, soft lighting, floral centerpieces trying too hard to look effortless. Sienna's name projected in cursive light against a silk-draped wall. Reset with Sienna. Finding grace in the mess. I stood in the back, invisible again. Just how they liked me. On stage, Sienna was mid-sentence voice honeyed with feigned vulnerability. We all have a sister or a friend who's lost right. And we want to love them, but sometimes they make it hard to love them. So, we send them light and move on. I stepped forward. A hush spread. The envelope was light in my hand, but it may as well have been on fire. I walked slowly down the aisle, each footstep echoing like a verdict. Her eyes met mine. A flash of something fear, recognition. Then she smoothed it into a smile. Maren, she purred. Everyone, this is my sister. I held out the envelope. This is for you. She didn't take it at first. Then, reluctantly, she did. The moment she touched it, her face faltered. She knew. Not the details, but the meaning. I turned. That could have been the end. But then a voice rose. I stand with her. It was Aunt Lee. She walked from the far side of the room, every step steady, deliberate. People whispered. She reached the stage and faced the crowd. I don't stand with curated grief, she said. I don't stand with stories told through filters. I stand with the girl they forgot, the one who wasn't easy to market. She looked at me, then back at them. You want healing. Start with telling the truth. The crowd shifted. Murmurs buzzed, phones came out. Sienna tried to laugh it off. Family, drama, am I right? But the screen behind her flickered. Someone had connected it to the live stream chat, unfiltered, unstoppable, and the comments were pouring in. Letter rot leaks, sister scam, healing, doesn't mean, erasing screenshots began circulating. Voice memos, snippets of past live streams where Sienna joked about her weird little sister in the mould house. And then came the final blow. Someone uploaded a voicemail. Mum's voice. Just play along, Sienna. She'll burn out eventually. You're the face people believe. Gasps. One woman in the front row stood up and walked out. Another took off her reset wristband and dropped it on the floor. Sienna was frozen, the spotlight now cruel. Aunt Lee turned to me. And then, without hesitation, she opened her arms. I didn't plan to walk into them. I didn't even realize I had until my cheek was against her shoulder, and I heard her whisper, You were never invisible, just too bright for their taste. Flashbulbs popped, but this time they weren't cropping me out. I closed my eyes and let myself be seen, and that finally was enough. It had been a month, 30 days since the letter, 30 mornings since Aunt Lee held me in front of 100 blinking eyes, and I realised that visibility wasn't a currency, it was a homecoming. Since then, the house has changed. No, it wasn't fixed. The plumbing still hiccuped, the roof still whimpered in the rain, but there was warmth in the floorboards now. And when the wind knocked, it sounded less like morning and more like memory. I spent the first few weeks rebuilding small things. A coat of paint here, a new hinge there. I replaced the broken front step with wood scavenged from a flea market, carving a tiny phrase into the bottom plank before sealing it, still standing. And I was. Children from down the road began stopping by chalk in hand. At first they just played on the edge of the driveway, but one day I stepped outside and found 3 pastel phrases written across the walkway. You matter. We see you. Welcome home. They hadn't knocked, hadn't asked. They just saw a space that looked like it needed colour and decided to give it. The first time I cried in that house wasn't over my family. It was over sidewalk chalk. Inside, I kept things simple. Mornings with strong tea, afternoons with bare hands in the soil planting lavender and tomatoes, evenings with old records and no explanations. The stillness didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt earned. Then came the text. I was watering the porch vines when my phone buzzed. The name lit up instantly, Sienna. I stared at the screen. My hands still smelled like rosemary. The message preview read, "Hey, could I stay with you for a few days, just need some quiet." No apology. No reference to what had unravelled publicly. Just the same soft entitlement wrapped in lowercase need. A month ago, I would have frozen, weighed every word, rehearsed my boundaries. Now, I placed the phone face down on the windowsill and walked inside. Not with anger, not with triumph, just certainty. I opened a drawer and pulled out a note card, the kind I used to keep for affirmations I never quite believed. On it, I wrote in clean block letters, "There's no space for lies here anymore. I wish you peace." I snapped a picture, sent it, and turned the phone off. I didn't wait for her response. I opened the front door again, and sunlight spilled across the floor. The smell of mildew was gone, replaced by lemon oil and hope. The porch didn't shake when I stepped onto it. My feet were steady. My back is straight. Aunt Lee had sent me a package last week. Inside was a small hand-carved plaque. The wood was old, but polished, etched with a phrase I hadn't heard since I was a child. You always had the light. I hung it above the kitchen sink. Every time I washed a dish or filled a glass, I looked up and read those words again. Not to remind myself, but to believe them. Later that evening, the neighbour's kid knocked on my door. She held up a handful of dandelions and asked if she could plant them in my yard. "They're weeds," she said, "but they're pretty." I smiled. Weeds survive everything. That's kind of the point. We planted them together, and for the first time in my life, I felt rooted. Not to a family, not to an expectation, but to a version of myself that didn't require permission to bloom. The porch light flickered, once then stayed on. This was home, and it didn't need to be loud to be sacred. It just needed to be mine. People say $900 can't buy peace. They're right. Peace costs more. It costs clarity, confrontation, and the kind of grief that doesn't come with flowers. But for me, the house wasn't a purchase. It was a declaration. Not against anyone, but finally for myself. I used to think foundations were poured with cement and steel. Now I know sometimes they're made from Silence you survive and the voice you reclaim inside it. This house creaks when I walk. The floor slants slightly in the guest room. The kitchen window still fogs up when it rains. And yet, this imperfect place holds more stability than the cathedral of expectations I once tried to worship in. Most mornings I wake to birdsong and the soft whir of the old ceiling fan. The air smells of coffee and lavender and I let it linger. I don't rush anymore. I don't run. I don't rehearse conversations in my head that I know won't change anything. There's a rhythm now, not one dictated by guilt or obligation, but one chosen. The neighbours wave. Kids ride their bikes across my driveway like it's part of their adventure. They've named the house the lighthouse, even though it's miles from any ocean. I asked why, because it feels safe, one of them said. Like it's looking out for us. That stuck, because I'd spent years trying to earn a seat at a table that kept moving further away. Family dinners, where I became the afterthought, the alternate, the too much, and never enough. I used to bend myself into an apology just to be handed crumbs. Now, I open my own door, and some days I set another place, not for them, but for the part of me I used to silence. She's not a ghost. She's not bitter. She's rebuilding. I painted the old hallway last week, a soft eggshell blue, covered the scribbles and cracks, but left one small patch near the bottom corner, like a scar you keep to remember. Next to the front window, I framed the photo Aunt Lee sent me. It's not of us. It's a sunset, blazing pink, orange, indigo, but she wrote something on the back in her looping, imperfect cursive. You don't have to light yourself on fire to keep anyone else warm. It rests on the sill next to a candle I don't always light. Because some things aren't for performance. Some things just are. People sometimes ask gently if I've spoken to my parents. Or to Sienna. The answer is no. But the truth is layered. No, I haven't picked up their calls. No, I haven't responded to the vague emails with subject lines like checking in or family is forever. But I have spoken. To myself. To the echoing ache they left. And more importantly, to the younger version of me who kept asking, what did I do wrong? I told her the truth. You didn't do anything wrong. You just stopped agreeing to disappear. I no longer want revenge. That's the twist I didn't expect. What I want is cleaner than that. Simpler. A life that doesn't require shrinking. I host writing workshops now once a month. Small circle, mismatched chairs. We read out loud, pass around tea and laugh too much. A teenage girl once said, "This house feels like it's on our side." I wanted to tell her, so are you. Last Sunday, I found a note tucked under the doormat. No envelope, just a folded scrap of paper. It read, I'm sorry. I see it now, but I think I'm too late. S. I didn't cry, not because it didn't matter, but because it wasn't mine to carry anymore. I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer, not as a keepsake, just as a reminder. Some apologies aren't for redemption, they're for release. In the kitchen above the sink hangs the hand-carved sign Aunt Lee sent, "You always had the light." I read it every day. And some days I say it out loud, not to believe it, but to own it. The porch is solid now. I reinforced it with care, not code. It still moans when it's cold, but it doesn't shake. Neither do I. There are no family portraits on the walls. But there are drawings, cards, smiles frozen in brush strokes from children who never asked me to earn their love. Sometimes I sit on the steps with a book. Sometimes with nothing. And always with the knowledge that I built this. Not from inheritance, not from forgiveness, but from the truth. Sometimes the hardest walls we break are the ones built by those who claim to love us most. And sometimes the only way to heal is to stop knocking and build your own door. I look around at the chipped edges, the wild dandelions, the laughter echoing from the neighbour's yard. I feel the breeze lift my hair, and I whisper to the air, "What about you? Have you ever had to choose peace over family?" Share your story below. I read every comment. If you love true family drama stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.